The blazing hot weather, combined with lack of rain, has pushed many summer fruits into ripening prematurely. Last year, bananas were selling for such a high price that many farmers rushed to grow more. But this year, there's a glut and prices have fallen sharply.
You can walk into almost any grocery store in America and buy a banana for about 60 cents a pound. That's cheaper than potatoes, cheaper than carrots, cheaper than onions, which literally just sit in a bag and don't go bad for months. Bananas, on the other hand, are one of the most fragile fruits on the planet. They grow thousands of miles away in the tropics. They have to be hand-picked, carefully packed, loaded into refrigerated shipping containers, transported across oceans, driven across highways, and delivered to your store within about 2 weeks before they turn to mush. And somehow, after all of that, they cost less than almost everything else in the produce aisle. That doesn't make sense, unless you understand the real story behind how bananas got this cheap. Because it involves a corporation so powerful it overthrew a democratically elected government, a fruit so genetically fragile it could go extinct in our lifetime, and a pricing trick your grocery store uses to manipulate you every single time you walk through the door. To understand why bananas are so cheap, you have to go back to 1876. That year, at the World's Fair in Philadelphia, most Americans tasted a banana for the first time. Each one was wrapped in foil and sold for 10 cents, which is about $2 today. It was treated like an exotic delicacy, something you'd try once and tell your friends about. But a handful of American businessmen saw something else. They saw a fruit that grew fast, grew in massive quantities, and grew in countries where land and labor cost almost nothing. Andrew Preston and Minor Cooper Keith were among the first to realize the opportunity. Preston co-founded the Boston Fruit Company. Keith was building railroads in Costa Rica and started planting bananas alongside the tracks. When both men ran into financial trouble, they merged their operations in 1899, creating one of the most powerful corporations in American history, the United Fruit Company. Within a few decades, United Fruit controlled an empire. By the 1930s, the company owned 3.5 million acres of land across Central America and the Caribbean. It ran the postal service in Guatemala. It controlled the country's telephone system. It owned most of the railroad tracks. It was the single largest landowner in the entire country. People started calling it El Pulpo, the octopus, because its tentacles reached into every part of these nations' economies, and the countries it dominated became known by a term we still use today, one that was literally invented because of this company: banana republics. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. In 1944, Guatemala had a revolution. The people overthrew a military dictator and elected a new president who actually wanted to help ordinary citizens. By 1951, a man named Jacobo Arbenz was in charge, and he decided to do something radical. He looked at the fact that a tiny number of landowners, including United Fruit, controlled most of the farmland, while hundreds of thousands of peasants had nothing. So he passed a land reform law. It was actually pretty moderate. It only targeted large estates with land that wasn't being cultivated and offered the owners compensation through government bonds. But United Fruit owned about 600,000 acres in Guatemala, and most of it was sitting unused. Arbenz confiscated a chunk of it and offered the company $1.2 million in compensation, based on the value United Fruit had declared on its own tax filings. The company wanted $16 million instead, and it had friends in very high places. The Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, had previously worked as United Fruit's attorney. His brother, Alan Dulles, was the director of the CIA and had served on the company's board. The president's personal secretary was married to United Fruit's top PR man. The connections went deep. United Fruit launched a propaganda campaign claiming Guatemala was going communist. They hired Edward Bernays, the man who literally invented modern public relations, to feed stories to American journalists. The New York Times and other outlets ran alarming articles about Soviet influence in Central America. In reality, Arbenz just wanted peasants to have farmland. It didn't matter. In 1954, the CIA launched Operation PB Success. With just 150 rebels, a propaganda radio station, and a handful of American-piloted planes, they overthrew Arbenz and installed a military government that immediately gave all the land back to United Fruit and outlawed over 500 trade unions. Guatemala was plunged into a civil war that lasted 3 decades. Tens of thousands of people were killed, and United Fruit got its bananas. This is the foundation that cheap bananas are built on, a system designed from the beginning to keep costs as low as possible by controlling land, labor, transportation, and entire governments. But there's another reason bananas are so cheap, and this one is about biology. The banana you eat today is called the Cavendish, but it wasn't always the world's banana. Before the 1950s, the dominant variety was the Gros Michel, nicknamed Big Mike. By most accounts, it tasted better than what we eat now. Sweeter, creamier, with a thicker peel that made it easier to transport. But Big Mike had a fatal flaw. Every commercial banana plant is a clone. Bananas don't reproduce through seeds like most fruits. They're propagated from cuttings of existing plants, which means every single banana of the same variety is genetically identical. And when every plant has the exact same DNA, a single disease can wipe out the entire species. That's exactly what happened. A soil fungus called Panama disease, or Fusarium wilt, spread through Central American plantations starting in the early 1900s. The banana companies tried to outrun it by clearing new rainforest and planting fresh fields. But the fungus followed. By the 1960s, the Gros Michel was commercially extinct. The industry scrambled and found a replacement, the Cavendish, which happened to be resistant to that particular strain of the fungus. But here's the problem. The Cavendish is also a clone. Every Cavendish banana on Earth is genetically identical. And the exact same thing that killed Big Mike is happening again. A new strain called Tropical Race 4 has already devastated plantations across Asia, Australia, the Middle East, and Africa. It was detected in Colombia in 2019 and Peru in 2021. There is no fungicide that works against it. There is no resistant replacement variety ready to go. Scientists have been warning about this for years. One banana researcher told NPR that every scientist he spoke to agreed it wasn't a question of if, but when. And once contaminated soil reaches the major export plantations of Latin America at full scale, the banana as we know it could disappear, just like Big Mike did. The fact that we grow one variety, cloned billions of times, in massive monoculture plantations with zero genetic diversity, is precisely what makes bananas so cheap. It's a perfectly efficient system. Growers know exactly how the fruit will behave. Shippers know exactly how to store it. Retailers know exactly what they're getting every single week. But that efficiency comes at a terrifying cost. The entire system is one bad outbreak away from collapse. And then there's the human cost. The average banana worker in Ecuador, the world's largest banana exporter, makes somewhere around $6 to $7 a day. In some regions of Guatemala, workers earn as little as $3 a day with no benefits. Human Rights Watch has documented child laborers as young as 8 years old working on banana plantations, putting in 12-hour days. In Ecuador, only about 1% of banana workers belong to any kind of union. Those who try to organize are often fired or threatened. Workers are regularly exposed to aerial pesticides spraying without adequate protection. They develop skin conditions, respiratory problems, and long-term health issues. Some use banana leaves to shield themselves from the chemicals because they aren't given proper safety equipment. And the companies sourcing these bananas, Chiquita, Dole, Del Monte, the direct descendants of the original banana empires, have been repeatedly accused of failing to enforce basic labor standards at the plantations they buy from. This is the part of the price tag you never see. When a banana costs 60 cents a pound, someone somewhere is absorbing the real cost. And it's usually the person picking it. But here's one more layer to this story that most people don't know. Your grocery store isn't just selling bananas cheap because they're cheap to produce. In many cases, your grocery store is selling bananas at a loss on purpose. Bananas are what the retail industry calls a loss leader. They're a product that stores sell at or below their actual cost, specifically to get you through the door. The logic is simple. Everyone buys bananas. Nearly 70% of American households purchase them regularly. They're the most consumed fresh fruit in the country. The average American eats about 27 pounds of bananas per year, which works out to roughly 90 bananas. So grocery stores keep the price absurdly low, sometimes as low as 19 cents per banana at Trader Joe's, because they know that once you walk in for the bananas, you're going to grab yogurt, cereal, milk, and a dozen other things with much higher profit margins. The bananas are bait, the rest of your cart is where the store actually makes its money. This is why the price of bananas has barely moved in decades. According to federal data, bananas have never exceeded 80 cents per pound since 2004. Adjusted for inflation, bananas actually cost less now than they did years ago. At the current rate of inflation, one economist estimated it would take 210 years for a banana to reach $10. And that stability isn't natural, it's engineered. By corporations that control production, by supply chains optimized over a century, by governments that look the other way on labor practices, and by retailers who'd rather lose money on bananas than lose your foot traffic. So the next time you grab a bunch of bananas and think, wow, these are cheap, just remember, that price didn't happen by accident. It was built over 150 years by fruit companies that toppled governments. A monoculture system that's racing toward collapse. Workers who earn a few dollars a day. And a grocery store that's perfectly happy to sell you bananas at a loss. Because the real product they're selling is everything else in your cart. The banana might be the cheapest thing in the store, but the cost of keeping it that way has been enormous. I'm curious what you think. Should bananas cost more? Or is the system working exactly the way it was designed to? Let me know in the comments. If you found this interesting, there's a video on screen right now that goes even deeper into how the things we buy every day are hiding stories just like this one. Click it.